Ezras Hashem. Today's daf is Masechta Menachos Daf Kuf Tes 109, and we will begin from the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Ches Amid Beis. So the Mishnah says like this. Let's make it bigger. Ha'omer, somebody says, Echad Mikvasai Hegdish. Hi, Alan. We just began. So the person says, someone says, Echad mikvasei hegdish. One of my sheep should be hegdish. He didn't specify which one, right? Or he said, Ve'echad mishvarei hegdish, or one of my oxen should be hegdish. If he just had two oxen, so hagodol shebehem hegdish. So then the more robust one, the bigger one, is hegdish. That's what he meant. Because the person, when he makes a donation to hegdish, he's usually doing it with a good eye and donating the nicer animal. But what happens if he has shloisha, if he has three animals, one good, one medium, one bad, beinin shebehem hegdish. The middle one is hegdish. So the Gemara is going to explain what that means. What happens if a person says pirashti beini de mashi pirashti? A person says, I remember specifying an animal, but I don't remember what. Or my father, before he died, said to me, give this animal to hegdish, and I don't know how. I don't know which one. Hagodol shebehem hegdish. The big one is considered hegdish. So basically what we just learned is that when a person makes a donation to hegdish, we always assume that he gave the nicest animal to hegdish. So Alma, that's what we're beginning the Gemara, Kuf Chesam and Beis. Alma, so we see from our Gemara, Magdish, if somebody's making something hegdish, ba'ayin yufa Magdish. He's making it with the generous. He's very generous to hegdish. So we always assume that he meant the nicest animal he's giving to hegdish when he. So the Gemara says, Ein Sefer, then look at the end of the Mishnah. If a person has three animals, one good, one medium, one not so good, one bad. So when he said hegdish, we assume beini nishbehem hegdish. He meant the middle one. Alma. So what do we see from there? Magdish. When you're giving hegdish, you're not only giving the best, but ayin ra magdish. You're giving the not the best. Not even the you're giving it with a bad eye. You don't want to give the best to hegdish. You only want to give the middle one to hegdish. So how do you reconcile the contradiction in the Mishnah? Shmuel says, the first, when a person has three, Shmuel says the pshat in the Mishnah, for certainly the gadol is hegdish, the biggest one is hegdish. But what the Mishnah is saying is that even the middle one is hegdish. And then why? Well, how could you say the middle one? It's not the best, but the lagabe kotin ayin yafahu. But when you compare it to the one underneath it, this is considered the nicest animal. So there's a chashash, there's a concern that maybe he meant the middle one. So heichet of it. So how should he do it? Because he never meant to give two animals to hegdish. He only meant to give one animal to hegdish. Omar Reb Chia Barav says, Mamtin lo yachiyumam. You wait till the middle one gets a mum, a blemish. And then you say, you transfer any possible kedusha that was on the middle animal onto the big animal. So mamanavshach. If he meant the biggest animal, so the biggest animal is going to hegdish. If he meant the middle animal and did not mean the biggest animal, well, the middle animal now got a mum, so you transferred anyway the kedusha of the middle animal onto the big one. Now you bring the biggest one to as a carbon, or you bring it to the base of Migdash. Says the Gemara, Omar Av Nachman, Omar Av Abavua, Loishana, we didn't learn Elada Omar Echad Mishvarei Hegdish. Aval Omar Echad Mishvarei Hegdish, Hagodol Shebehem Hegdish. The only time if you have an assumption that he meant possibly the middle one is if he said one of my oxen should be hegdish. So maybe he didn't mean the gadol, the best one. Maybe he meant one in the middle. But Aval Omar, if he said shar bishvare hegdish, the ox of my oxen. That means he's saying the best ox, almost like saying the number one ox of all my oxen should be hegdish. Then hagadol shebem hegdish, the biggest one is hegdish. Torah b'torah kama. He's saying the ox of my oxen. So he's saying I mean the best. So if a person says that language, then he means the best. Eini, it's not so. If a person says the chaveri, I'm selling you a house, an apartment for my apartments. A person, let's say, has a bunch of apartments, and he said, "I'm selling you a bunch, the one apartment and the apartment of all my apartments." It's the same idea. So does he have to give him the best apartment that he has? Mar'eu aliyah, you could show him the top apartment. In ancient times, even up until the 1900s in New York, the top apartment was the cheaper one because you didn't have air conditioning or elevators. So that was the cheaper one. So you can show him that, no, I meant to sell you my cheapest apartment. La mishum degriya. So we see that when a person says bayis babaisi, the house, the apartment of my apartments, he doesn't mean to give him the best apartment. And says the Gemara, loy, not so. A brisa means mu'ula shebabatim. He does. He has to give the mar'eu aliyah, means you have to show him your best apartment. Meisvei, shor b'shvare hegdish. V'chein shor shel hegdish nis'ara b'cherem hagodol shebem hegdish. V'kulam yamachru l'tzarchi oilers udmei and kulam. So the brisa says clearly, if a person says my shor amongst my shor is hegdish, so the most robust, the gadol shebehem, is hegdish. Okay, the biggest one is hegdish. So far, so good. But then the brisa says there's a possibility that you meant the other oxen as well. So you sell those oxen for somebody who needs a carbon oila, but since it didn't have a blemish or anything like that, you're just selling it. And you keep the money because maybe you meant the other ones to be hegdish, and this was the din by the same din by shar shel hegdish. If you have an oxen of hegdish that got mixed up in others, and you don't know which is the ox of hegdish, you take the best one and give it to hegdish, and then you sell the other ones and keep the money. So we see from here that a person doesn't always give the best ox to hegdish. Answers the Gemara, yes. Tergama ashar shehegdish is arabachein. That when do you say that he possibly meant other oxen? Is if there was an ox of hegdish that got mixed up in others. It's already hegdish and it got mixed up with others. But if a person says clearly shar b'shvare hegdish, he only meant the gadol. How the chen kamar says the brayso, but didn't the brayso compare the two cases? Shar b'shvare hegdish and shar hegdish is arabachein. That means that they both have the same dinim. And says Gemara Tigma Gadol, they both have the same din regarding what he for sure meant. He for sure meant the Gadol shebehem, but it deviates from each other. When he says Shar b'shvare hegdish, all you have to give is the Gadol shebehem, and the rest you don't have to do anything. But when Shar hegdish got mixed up with others, then it's a two-step process. You give the Gadol to hegdish, and then you sell the rest with tzarchei oilers. Meisvei, the Gemara asks a question. A guy says, "Bayis bebeisi ani moichelach." He says to his friend, "The house of my houses, I'm selling to you." Okay, so probably he meant to sell him his best house, v'nafel, and one of his houses collapsed. Mar'ehu nafel. You could tell the guy that the one that collapsed was the one I wanted to sell to you. Or if he says, "Ebed v'abodai ani moichelach," I'm selling you the slave of my slave. So you think he means the best slave, umeis, and one of them just died, Myrehu umeis. You can say, oh, that was the one that I sold to you, and you lost your money. So wait a second, but you just always told me that he meant the best houses. So we go to Amid Aleph, Kufches, Va'amai. Why does this make sense? Lech say hayard hayden nafal hayden meis. Let's see if it was the biggest one that died, if it was the nicest house that collapsed, or the best slave that died. And if it's not, that wasn't the one that he bought, because when he sold, he said, "Bayis bebaisi, I'm selling you the house of my house." So Pashtus, you could think of it that he meant to sell only the biggest house and nothing else. So Gemara says, truth is, you're asking a question that you have two people arguing. The seller says, I only meant the house that collapsed. And the Lakeach said, no, you sold me your mansion. So then it's on the onus is on the purchaser to prove it. Shanu Lakeach, because when you have a civil case between two litigants, the Yad Balashtar Tachtoina, the one that wants to pull money out of somebody, he has to prove it. So when it comes to Hegdish, automatically we say when a person says my house belongs to Hegdish, or my oxen belong to Hegdish, he means the best one. But when he's dealing with somebody else, another litigant, then the other person has to prove exactly what the seller meant. And that's therefore, now that you established this new concept, that when two people have an argument, the halachas are different. You could say the same idea by the first case. The first case, when a guy says to somebody, I'm selling you one of my apartments, we learned that he could even show him the attic. The highest floor apartment, that's the one you're getting. Why? Because when you're dealing with two litigants, it's under the onus is under the renter to prove, or the purchaser to prove that the seller meant the best apartment. And since he didn't prove it, the seller can say, oh, here's the worst apartment. Again, Hegdish is different. When a person says, ox of my oxen belongs to Hegdish, we're going to assume that he meant the best ox. Says the Mishnah. Hare olai. Now, for this Mishnah, all you have to know is just one bit of history, which is not so known, that during the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, let's say 2,300 years ago, 300 BCE, so there was a person named Chonya. He was the son of Shimon HaTzadik, and he got into a fight with the Jews living in Yerushalayim, and he went to Alexandria of Egypt and built a miniature Beis Hamikdash there. So he didn't, you didn't have to go up to Yerushalayim. You could go to his Egyptian, theme park and do the same thing. So, but he meant it l'shem shemayim. So let's see what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, "Harei alai oila." If a person says, "I promise to bring a carbon oila," so yakrivena b'mikdash, then he has to go to the Beis Hamikdash to bring it. Vim hikriva b'beis Chanya, but let's say he goes to Alexandria of Egypt and offers the carbon in the house of Chanya, in that temple. Lo yotze, he was not yotze. He didn't fulfill his obligation. What happens if he says, Harei alai oila shakrivenu b'beis Chanya? If he says, I'm promised to bring a carbon oila, and I'm going to bring it in the Chanya temple, yakrivenu b'mikdash, he first should try to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, because he said, Harei alai oila. But if you bring it outside into the Egyptian temple, you fulfilled your obligation. So the Gemara is going to ask, how could you fulfill your obligation of a carbon oila, offering it up in the temple of Chanya? That's not the Beis Hamikdash. Rab Shimon says, Einzu oila. If you say, I'm going to bring an oila to Beis Chanya, then your words are meaningless because they don't make sense. Oila is only in the Beis Hamikdash. Then the Mishnah says another example. Hareini noza yigalach b'mikdash. If a person says, I promise to be a nozer, he should take the haircut, he should bring his karbonos in the Beis Hamikdash. Vim gilach, if he shaved off, because a nozer, when he brings his karbonos, he shaves his hair off and puts it under the pot of the shlamim and cooks it there in the Beis Hamikdash. So vim gilach b'beis Chanya, if you do that in Beis Chanya, lo yotza, you didn't fulfill your obligation of carbon nazirs. But if you say Areinu Nazar Agalach bebeis Chanya, you say I'm going to bring a Nazar, but the carbonos I'm going to bring in Beis Chanya. Yigalach b'migdash. You have to bring the carbon to Migdash. In Gilach bebeis Chanya Yatza. If you're going to do the haircut in the Beis Chanya and you bring your carbonos to Beis Chanya, so you said Hareinu Nazar that I'm going to bring it in Beis Chanya Yatza. You fulfilled your obligation. So the Gemara is going to speak that out as well. Rab Shimon Oime Ein Zen Nazir. That's not a nazir. You make no sense. You say I'm going to be a nazir, but I'm going to bring the karbanos and base chanya. So that's not a promise. So the Gemara deals with the first case in the Mishnah. The first case in the Mishnah, a person says, Hare olai oila, but I'm going to bring it in the Beis Chanya temple. So if you do and bring it in Beis Chanya temple, you're a yaitza. Says the Gemara, what do you mean you're a yaitza? Hamikta katla. You should get the death penalty because you have a carbon oila, and where will you makrav it? Outside the Beis Hamikdash. And we know that if you take your carbon and makrav it not in the Beis Hamikdash, that's called shchiti chutz. You get karis. So how do you explain the Mishnah? Amar Rav Hamnun is going to say like this: you do get karis, no question, you get karis, but after you do that, you don't have to bring a new carbon, because once you lost this animal, it's like the animal died and on its own, and you didn't take personal insurance on it, so you don't have to bring a new one in the Beis Hamikdash. It's as if he said, I promise to bring an oila on the condition that if something happens to the animal, I'm not responsible. So since he shechted it in Beis Chanya, he's chayiv kares, that's a side thing. But now there is no animal. So if there is no animal, then he doesn't have to fulfill his obligation because there's no more animal. So Rava, if that's the explanation of the Mishnah, then it doesn't make so much sense. Let's see the end of the Mishnah. So what the Gemara is asking is, how can you say that makes sense? In the end of the Mishnah, if a person says, I'm going to bring a nazir, and in the Beis Chanya, the Mishnah says you a yaitze if you bring it in Beis Chanya, but if you didn't bring any karbanos, your naziris doesn't go off. You're still a nazir, because a nazir has to bring his karbanos, and as long as you weren't yaitze bringing the carbon, which you certainly were not, because you brought it in Beis Chanya, you're still considered a nazir, and the Mishnah says you're no more a nazir. Rava said like this: Adam zeladar niskaven. This person never meant to bring a carbon. He actually wanted to give a gift. Omar, he said, he lived in, let's say, in Egypt, and he said, this is what he meant to say. If I'm going to be able to bring it in Chanya, Tarachna, then I want it to be a carbon. But more than that, if they're going to force me to bring it into the Beis Hamikdash, I don't want it to be a carbon. So therefore, he really never made a neder for a carbon. So there is no carbon over here. And same thing, Nazir. Name. He wanted to be a Nazir, but he didn't want it. He said, this is what he meant to say. If it's enough to bring the carbon Naziris in the temple of Chanya, then I want to be a real Nazir. The Eli and Tvei. But more than that, if I have to go to the Beis Hamikdash, then I don't want to be a Nazir. So he's never Nazir in the first place. That's the difference. According to Rav Hamnuna, he actually is chayiv kares. According to Rava, this was never a carbon to begin with. It's not even a carbon. But if you could bring it in Beis Chanya, then it would be a carbon. So Rav Hamnuna Amalach, Rav Hamnuna will say, Nazir k'dekamran. I trust your understanding of the Mishnah by Nazir. It's not, he never really took to be a Nazir. So therefore, he's not even a Nazir. But oila, when he says, Harei alai oila, if I could bring it in the Beis Chanya, what he meant to say is it's a real carbon oila. And therefore, when he shechts it in Beis Chanya, he's chayiv kares. He's chayiv kares because he shechted it outside the Beis Hamikdash. But he's not chayiv to bring a new carbon because the carbon is dead. That's what he meant to say. So Rav Hamnuna halfway agreed to Rava in his understanding of the Mishnah, that when a person says Harei alai oila, he really means to bring a carbon oila. And Rabbi Yochanan agreed with Rabbi Hamnuna's understanding of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yochanan said, if you say, I'm going to bring an oila on the condition I can bring it in Beis Chanya, the kriva be'eretz Yisrael, yatsa, even if he didn't bring it to Beis Chanya, okay, and he didn't keep his nether, he said, it's an oila, really he's supposed to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash, and he brought it into Eretz Yisrael, yatsa, I mean, you don't have to bring a new carbon because you killed the animal. V'anish kares, you get a kares because you were makrav in Tel Aviv. You're supposed to makrav in the base of Mikdash. Midbar. He says, I'm bringing an oila, but I want to bring it in the desert. The Yarden, and he already crossed into Eretz Yisrael, and then he brought the carbon, but he didn't bring it in the base of Mikdash. Yatsa, then you fulfilled your obligation. You fulfilled your obligation. The Yatsa Anish Karis. Karis is because you were makrav it outside the base of Mikdash, right? You were makrav outside the base of Mikdash, but you don't have to bring a new carbon because it's as if you said, here's an oila. If it dies, then I don't want to bring another one. New Mishnah. What happens? We just said that the Beis Chanya was a place where people served in the temple in Egypt, make the copy of the Beis Hamikdash in Egypt, in Alexandria, but it was L'Shem Shemayim. So the Mishnah says that there was a punishment to them. A Kahanim, a Kohen, Sheshimshu Beis Chanya, that served in Beis Chanya. So maybe he served there because he got a better salary than the one in Jerusalem. So if he does tshuva or whatever, he can never become a kohen in the base of Mikdash Yerushalayim. A person who served, if a kohen served in a church, let's say, he can never serve again in the base of Mikdash. Shenama, because there's a pasuk says, that the pasuk describes kohanim that served in Avodah Zarah, that they can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash, but they are like Bali Mumin, that blemish. They could still partake in the food of the Beis Hamikdash, but they can't go up on the Beis Hamikdash to serve, like a Bal Mum. He splits in the spoils of the day. Amar Rav Yehuda said like this: Kohen sheshachet la'avodah zarah, a kohen that's slaughtered for a church. He slaughtered the animal. Now shechita in the Beis Hamikdash could be done by Yisrael. That's not serving in the temple. So that's not real service. So what's the din? A kohen that's slaughtered for Avodah Zarah, then he could still serve in the Beis Hamikdash, and he could still serve. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Dimi, Mikro. What's the pasuk? There's a pasuk that says like this: because they served in Avodah Zarah, and they were causing the Jewish people to do averis. Therefore, I swore, and I'll forgive them. But they can never serve me again. That's what the pasuk says. So God is angry at certain kahanim that did bad things. So if they serve for Avodah Zarah, if they did a service for Avodah Zarah, let's say they sprinkled the blood on the mizbeach of an Avodah Zarah, so they can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash again. Shchita, but if they just slaughter in the base for Avodah Zarah, lav sheresu, that's not called a service for the temple, and therefore if they slaughtered for Avodah Zarah, they could get a job in the Beis Hamikdash. Now, Itmar, we learned shagag bezrika. If a kohen made a mistake and sprinkled for Avodah Zarah by mistake, so he did a service, but it was by mistake. Rav Nachman Amar Karban Reich Nechayach, he could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Sheshes Amar Ein Karban Reich Nechayach, he can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Amar Rav Sheshes says, how do I know that even if you do a service by mistake, you can never serve again? That same pasuk in Yechezkel says he did a mikshel and an oven. My love, oy mikshel oy oven. Mikshel shogeg v'oven mezid. That whether he served in a church, in another temple, by mistake or on purpose for sure not, he can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. And that's exactly what Rav Sheshes holds, that even if the kohen did a zrika by mistake, he can never serve again in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Nachman Mikshel ba'oven. No, it's one thing, a stumbling block of a mezid. So therefore, only if he did a b'mezid on purpose, he can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But if he did a zrika for Avodah Zarah by mistake, he could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Nachman said, how do I know? My din, the Tanya, we learned in a brisa, the kohen al nefesh hashageres bechata bishgoga. The kohen that did an aveira in Avodah Zarah, he could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. He could bring his own carbon. That's basically it. Melamed shekohen mischapa yedei atzmei. If the kohen did an aveira with Avodah Zarah, he could bring his own carbon. But what Aveira Avodah Zarah did he do? Ilema b'shchita, ma'ir shoygeg afil beis name. Why does the pasuk say that he could serve in the temple in the Beis Hamikdash if he did it mishchita by mistake? Even if he did it on purpose, he could still bring his own carbon. He could still bring other people's carbonas because shchita is nothing, is not considered a service for Avodah Zarah. Elalav, the thing is, bezrika, he did it as zrika. And therefore, the Torah is telling you that if a kohen by mistake did zrika, and therefore he has to bring his carbon for Avodah Zarah for forgiveness, he could makriv his own carbon. So we see, even zrika by mistake, the kohen could still serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Sheshes, Amalach, Loilam b'shchita, uvemezed loinasim misharis l'Avodah Zarah. And the pasuk is saying, really, it's shchita. And the chiddush of the Torah is that only if you did shchita by mistake, you can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash. If you do shchita on purpose, Rav Sheshes goes even stricter. He says shchita on purpose for an Avodah Zarah, you can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash anymore. And we're going to see a bunch of machlokes now between Rav Sheshes and Rav Nachman. Rav Sheshes is very strict; a kohen can't serve, and Rav Nachman says he could serve. The itma we learned. Hezed b'shchita. Rav Nachman amar karbonai reich nechoyach. Rav Sheshes amar ein karbonai reich nechoyach. If you did a purpose a shchita for Avodah Zarah, Rav Nachman says you could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Sheshes says you can't serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Nachman amar karbonai reich nechoyach v'layal v'sheres. Rav Nachman said you could serve in the Beis Hamikdash because all you did was shchita, even if you did it on purpose. Rav Sheshes amar ein karbonai reich nechoyach. You can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Why? We go to Amid Beis. Nasa misharis l'Avodah Zarah. It's somewhat of a service for Avodah Zarah because you're doing things on purpose for Avodah Zarah. How can I let you back into the Beis Hamikdash? How do I know what I'm saying? The Tanya we learned to the Brisa. The Brisa says if a kohen did a service in Avodah Zarah and does tshuva, he could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. What does that mean? If he did it by mistake, my v'shav. Then what tshuva did he need to do? Shav aimidhu. He's already did tshuva even before he did it because he never wanted to do it. Ella, what the Bryce is talking about, pshit b'mezid. A kohen that did avodah zarah b'mezid, and now he wants to do tshuva. The bezrika, but if he did it on purpose, kishav ma'hava. So who cares if he does tshuva? Once you did a sprinkling on the Beis Hamikdash, that's it. You did a service for Avodah Zarah. It must be that it's shchita. That Bryce is telling you, kohen she'aved Avodah Zarah means he shechted on purpose for Avodah Zarah and then does tshuva. Then he could still serve in the Beis Hamikdash. So Rav Nachman maintains his opinion that hizid b'shchita, if you did it by mezid, by shchita, you could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Gemara, another minute. Rav Sheshes sama la'amalach lo'ilam b'shoygeg. He did it by mistake. This is what the Bryce means to say. In other words, really, he did the shchita by mistake. And that's what the Bryce means. Vishav means that shav means he was doing tshuva while he was doing it because he was doing it by mistake. So the Bryce is not talking about he did it on purpose. Then the Bryce said, then there's another machlokes. Hishtacha v'la'avodah zarah. If you bow to Avodah Zarah, he didn't do a service to Avodah. He just bowed down to Avodah Zarah. Rav Nachman Amar Karbonei Reich Nechayach. He could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Sheshes Amar Ein Karbonei Reich Nechayach. He can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. What about Hoydil Avodah Zarah? And if he just said, "Oh, this Avodah Zarah is valuable," Rav Nachman Amar Karbonei Reich Nechayach. He could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Rav Sheshes Amar Ein Karbonei Reich Nechayach. He can never serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Utzricha. Why do we need three machlokes in where it shows that Rav Nachman was light and he's lenient and he allowed a kohen to serve in the Beis Hamikdash, and Rav Sheshes always went strict. The Ashmin and concludes the Gemara. The Ashmin and Hachmais. If we just say that if you shechted b'mezid for Avodah Zarah, I would think Behi Kamar Rav Sheshes. On there, Rav Sheshes was strict. We should da'avad le'sheres because he did some sort of service. He shechted for Avodah Zarah. B'shem da'avad le'sheres by zrika. If you did zrika, that's why. If you did zrika by mistake, so you did a sheres. Avashchita delay avid sheres ema moy delay Rav Nachman, but a shchita b'mezid, where you didn't do any service, I might think he would be moy to Rav Nachman. Therefore, the Brisa says Therefore, we have the machlokes that Rav Sheshes even went strict. Not only if you're shoygig bezrika, but even if he was b'mezeh did shchita, he also cannot serve in the Beis Hamikdash. V'yash meaning shchita, which says shchita mishum da'avad le'avoda, because he did some sort of service. Aval ishtachva deloy avad le'avoda, but just bowing to avodah zara. I might think Rav Sheshes would say it's okay, he could serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Tzricha, that even if a kohen just bowed to avodah zara, he can no longer serve in the Beis Hamikdash. And Rav Sheshes teaches you a third thing. Because he did a service, he bowed down to avodah zara. That's why Rav Sheshes says he cannot serve in the Beis Hamikdash. But if he would just said, "Oh, I love avodah zara," and that avodah zara has value, so maybe he could still serve in the Beis Hamikdash because he only sinned with his mouth. Tzricha, that's what Rav Sheshes has to say. And in all cases, he can no longer serve in the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, Be'ez Hashem, tomorrow we'll finish this Masechta with the story of Chanya. Okay.
Thank you very much.